And the one in Cornwall, we're figuring out whether we can practice proper regenerative agriculture on vegetables, which is quite tricky, and it's a bit difficult to see how we can achieve that by integrating a little bit of small livestock, no-till practices, and things like that. So we want to kind of create a model that we can then utilize to replicate, and also to better inform the relationships with the over. I'd say in Europe we have about 300 direct farm relationships, and in the US, Roger, how many?
Around 100.
Around 100. I guess Roger manages our farm relationships here in the US. Yeah, and we also invest a lot in farms, so we do a lot of support within our supply chain, whether it's anything from prepayments to helping them build out infrastructure and helping them scale. And I guess the product, and one that's kind of in season, because we obviously like to talk about seasonality, that really defines this collaboration and what we've been able to achieve, is a category that we call green citrus. So a couple of years ago, I was in the summer down in near Naples, and I picked a green orange that reminded me of the bergamots that we were sourcing a couple of years before. We started sourcing bergamots, which are really good when they're in their green state, because the essential oils are much stronger. And I picked this orange that was green. It was about August time, and I thought, hell, that we can actually harvest citrus green, and we created a whole category. So we do mandarin, a navel orange, and a caracara that we harvest green. We created a category about 4 or 5 years ago by working with farmers directly and by working with the chefs. And if you go onto Instagram maybe like a week ago and you look back over the last couple of weeks in London, you will see I don't know, close to 100 different restaurants posting about green citrus, which is something that years ago nobody was utilizing in kitchens.
So maybe Kelly, we'll start with you for this. Can you describe a relationship with a farmer in this case that you feel best exemplifies what a successful sales partnership looks like, and sort of the roadmap that it took to build up a successful relationship?
Absolutely. But for our sake, wanted to do is continue with that this Louisiana citrus farmer I spoke about. That partnership is one that's long-standing, but that shouldn't disqualify it from this conversation. They came to us with this incredible citrus, which of course was something our customers wanted. You can get cuties as little similar tiny citrus things in our stores year-round, but when it comes to season, people want a little fresh seasonal time. They came to us with this product. They said, we can do X amount. So fantastic. And over the years, we grew that partnership. We expanded out regions, still really focused in Louisiana for the duration of the season. But we were able to grow with them at their pace in a way that filled both of our needs. And what I love most about this partnership is that, once a year we go out and visit the farm. But all year long, they felt comfortable to reach out to us. They check in, see how it's going, see what the next year looks like. We were always working sort of in tandem. And for me, that is the biggest thing that I've always looked for when I'm looking for a partner in any, we work across all categories. So, produce to seafood to body care even. We look for a partner that is open, honest, we can have that transparency with. If they can't show up and stock, 500 stores, then how many stores they can show up and stock and support us with, and we can support them. So for me, that is really the number one, is the good partnership piece to it. Being able to work very closely.
Could you tell us about an example of a successful sales partnership?
So as I spoke about before, we mainly work with restaurants. One good example I can think of is with the chef that from their side of things, helped me understand how I needed to develop out what I was doing on my side of things, and kind of what the expectations were. Because at that time, in my operation, the best time for delivery for me was when the sun went down, which was dinner service for the restaurant. Not the best time for delivery for me. And so there was a lot of conversations, which I think she was the communication and the transparency, the back and forth of what is working best, what's not working, how can we improve what we're doing, how the product work for you, that's a good product for me. Pricing, all very important topics that need to be spoke of constantly. It's because something that works right now might not work the same next year. There may be a larger demand, whatever it may be. Working closely, close enough to learn these things and fine tune your operation is definitely critical.
Is there anything that, are there any, in addition to the sort of logistical delivery times and the sort of business end of things, in terms of what you were actually growing, has there been sort of a give and take in terms of like he's been asking for things and you were able to accommodate that, or on the other side, you know, that you had to have certain things in your rotation that you said, you know, if you want this, you're going to have to also support me by purchasing this other
Most definitely. He's one of the chefs that helped us kind of find new products that he had been familiar with, that he knew that no one else was growing, that he knew were very, very delicious things that we had never come across. Gailon being one of those things, which is Chinese broccoli. It's one of the most delicious things in the world. And it also grows any time of the year. It's a heat-loving crop. You can keep the bugs off of it. It's a delicious broccoli alternative. Broccoli raw, all of the broccoli-esque type vegetables. It's a substitute or something that's interchangeable with it, and honestly tastes a little bit better than many of them. And so that was one of them. The Weaver Coche was another one. He asked me about it for many years before I'd ever even come across it. If you ever grow corn snuff, bring me. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to find out. And then, years passed, and as we started developing out our heirloom corn operation, heirloom corn for Nixonal and polenta and grits and all that stuff, we started to come across it a lot more. And had he not stressed the importance of that ingredient before, I probably would have not treated it with the care that it called for and with the attention that it needed, so everyone could enjoy it.
Erica and Frank, I want to go to the flip side of that. Can you in that context and side step? Do you want to say?
Sorry. So it's an interesting one because we were working with a larger distributor that does the same thing that we do in a way. They supply restaurants, but they're nationwide. In the UK, they're a nationwide company. They're one of two that is able to deliver throughout the UK. So they work with a lot of the nationwide chains. The interesting thing for us is that we pitched, there's a chain of restaurants called Carluccio's in the UK. They've got about 150 locations. And they were sourcing year-round a tomato, like a regular vine tomato out of France, which is hydroponically grown. And through the connection that we had with Reynolds, we met the Carluccio's development team, and we sold them on this idea of changing the source from that French hydroponic tomato, which could have been grown anywhere in the world really, to a soil-grown Sicilian tomato that we were going to grow on our farm. Anyways, we managed to do that, trips to Sicily, the whole thing. And anyways, fast forward, we did that for about a year and a bit. the product was completely different, like night and day. This incredible tomato that we were farming, it's a variety called Letizia. And it's an old vine tomato, you see thin skin, it goes really red. In the winter it's a bit harder to farm, but you can do it inside polytunnels. And the reason why that relationship fell down was because the distributor, so the guy that was basically taking in the tomatoes, stalking them, and sending them out to Carluccio's, had become so large and ingrained in a very kind of, let's call it modern distribution model, whereby everything from their buyers, their goods in team, the way that they inspect goods coming in, was pretty much the same as you find in some of the larger supermarkets. So people like Tesco's and stuff. So they've got a spec, they're very rigid. It's like this tomato. So they're looking at firmness of skin, dimension, color. So we've gone through all of that pre-launching the program for the food safety team. But every other day, or every other week, we have rejections. And it just got to a point after a little over a year that we had to stop the project, which is a real shame because we had taken, which is to me where how we can get the food system to really start changing is by taking mass market products and improving them. So that you all of a sudden, if you're going to Carluccio's, which is, I don't know what the equivalent here would be, but it's kind of very middle, low range restaurant chain, to be able to go there and have a tomato that is now soil grown in Sicily, full transparency of supply chain, with incredible flavor, and you think, it wouldn't require that much for them to just change the mindset within the distribution company to be able to accept that product and allow it to flow through. And it was too tricky for us to continue. We just got tired of it and pulled it up.
So Jocelyn and I, from the very beginning of our careers, really had one thing in mind, and it was to work with, a certain quality, a small-scale farmer. And typically, for me, when I opened my first butcher shop, I was looking for farmers who almost couldn't supply us because that's how small they were and that's how good of a job they were really doing. And so, I forged a relationship with them that looked like maybe I'd throw down 30 grand, 40 grand in advance so that they can put it towards fencing, they can put it towards feed, they can, put it towards growing, a bigger supply chain for us, right? And really also being able to maybe help figure out okay, who's going to be slaughtering, how are we going to get it down to the butcher shop, and all of that was super important. And at least at the beginning, it was working. And that was in LA, and it was a very small butcher shop, and it was lovely for what it was. From there, when I moved back to New York and was in the city as a chef, it really, the challenges became completely different. Not only are you up against the corporate structure of the restaurant group, right, with a lot of different people telling you what works, what doesn't work, where the financial, where the preferences are, right, what makes sense for everybody else. And that really pushed us towards ultimately having to work with responsible distributors. And to us as radical butchers, that was always a big no, that's not what you do. And so we really come full circle in that way. So when Jocelyn and I left to go do our CPG company and really start to source in a different way, we hit the same brick wall, mostly advisors telling us, hey, listen, once you grow to a certain scale, there's no way to accommodate that scale with this type of precious sourcing. And while that is true, right, we still actually work with distributors who work with who have a co-op system. And that's kind of probably what a lot of us do in order to make sure that the boat doesn't tip, right? But in doing so, our suggested retail pricing is still pretty high, and the people we're up against are people like Applegate, and Jocelyn and I talk about them being this big tree, and how are we going to knock it down? How are we going to knock it down? Because that's not the kind of meat we want to feed our kid. So even though we're up here and we're really close by Stone Farms, right? We're actually a 30-minute drive away. Frequently, unless we call up our farmer and we're like, hey, can you meet us on the side of the road with a case of chickens? We have to go to the grocery store. Most people have to go to the grocery store, right? So we're trying to figure out how to fix that system, and we're trying to provide some sort of an answer there. so there's still a lot of questions, and there's still ways to figure out how to make it better. In the process of doing all this, Jocelyn and I started a conversation with a farmer in Los Angeles who does a really, really precious thing. You know, he's growing pigs that his family's had in genetics for over 40 years. You know, he's really, really kind of hit the market in a great way, and that wasn't available to me when I had my first prototype in LA. So we've started talking to him, and we've started to talk to other farmers at the farmers market. And it's always the same concern, right? The concern is, how do you bring your animals to slaughter? How do you know that the animal that you're getting back is in fact your animal? You know, that means you really gotta know your stuff, right? How do you know that you got all your bones back? How do you know like that your yields are where they're supposed to be? Because ultimately, you know, they're kind of maybe stealing from you here and there, you know, or maybe you get like a hanger steak that's chopped in half. So there are all these different things. So in the course of talking to these folks, Jocelyn and I realized like, okay, like we got to partner with them in a very different way. It's not just us, you know, buying their meat so that we can like, you know, make our products with it. We actually do have to have a hand in doing the butchery for them as well. So we're in the process of talking about opening cut and wrap facilities for these farmers in partnership with the farmers. So it's not just like, you know, winner takes it all. It's like it's a big cooperative system. But, you know, we're trying to figure out how the system can actually benefit the farmer at the end of the day so that everyone walks away feeling really good about what they're doing.
So as we were preparing for this conversation, one of the things that kept coming up was you all sort of pointed to this tension between the idealism that often draws folks into farming, and especially the kind of farming that a lot of the farmers here are practicing, and the need to build a viable business. And this isn't just about sort of a homestead farm or that land, you know, idealistic notion, but, you know, how are you going to build and grow a viable business that's going to allow you to feed your family, that, you know, farmers can afford to buy themselves, and of course feeding everyone and providing everyone access to this incredible food. So whoever wants to jump in can sort of talk about that tension and maybe some guideposts for how to kind of like keep those two in balance.
Well, I guess over here, I think with idealism and optimism, you're not always the most honest or realistic with yourself about what you can produce and can't do for someone. What business part of sale part of choice. I think communicating, even just initially giving yourself time to assess the situation and to look at, you know, the fine details to find out if you're going to be able to supply this partner with whatever they're looking for, said products. And just having an open conversation about the financial needs of you as a farmer, what you need to get for your product, as opposed to them telling you what they want to pay for the product, which is an interesting game sometimes. You know, you might lose that customer because of your price points, but you definitely don't want to lose the manageability of your business because you're trying to beat someone else's price points. And so just being realistic with yourself about what you can take on and having honest conversations with the people that you're trying to work with and build these partnerships with about expectations on production, financial side of things. You know, I heard Franco mention prepayment for goods. That's a rarity with many customers. Most folks are paying much later than the product is delivered. And so just being upfront about what your needs are, if you know, what your expectations are as a farmer, what's realistic for you and your scale of operation is critical.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo absolutely everything you said. You know, as a retailer, we want a long-term partner. We don't want someone twice and then they disappear because it's not sustainable for them. So one thing I learned when I first started with Whole Foods, I come from running farmers markets, working in the market umbrella. And I sort of worked from the farmer side there, where I used to try to create these wholesale opportunities, because I see there's farmers come to market every Tuesday, and they had between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on Tuesday. And then after that, they didn't have anywhere else to go, or they'd sell to restaurants within, Monica, this lovely farming family with Creole tomatoes, and so many Creole tomatoes. I thought to myself, well, how do we open up these opportunities for restaurants? So thinking from that perspective, I'd see farmers who absolutely rush to feel, okay, you want to take a piece of 20 pieces of Creole tomatoes, great. What do you want to pay me for it? Which is exactly the opposite way to do it. So when I started with Whole Foods, I was really lucky enough to have we call them product coordinators who are in charge of certain departments. This is a guy from bakery. And we went around, we were meeting with bakers in New Orleans. And the first question he asked everybody was, bottom line, what do you need to be sustainable? If you could be transparent with me up front about what you need to be sustainable, and that might be volume, that might be points of distribution, that might be help sourcing cage-free eggs, like what is it? And then we can figure out if we can work together. Because time's money, right? Don't waste your time if it's not going to work for you. I used to tell partners, or potential partners all the time, like sometimes being a good partner means just saying not right now. And that's on both sides of it. If you can sell everything you grow or you make direct to someone at a farmer's market or to a restaurant, then maybe a larger retailer isn't the best for you right now. But if you have a roadmap for growth, maybe in the future, it's a good partnership. I think that answers your question.
Okay, I know we're getting close to time. I have one more question that I really want to get to for each of you. And then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience and from our live stream audience. So get ready, everyone. Okay. So one of the things that we really wanted to talk about that also came up a lot was scale. And I feel like in every room, in every conversation about regenerative farming, organic, any of this, the question is always like, how are you going to scale it? And what I don't want us to do is sort of let this conversation fall into that same trap of just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because that's how we end up back where we started, right? So I have a particular question for each of you about how skill can be incorporated into the work of these farmers while maintaining the sort of ecological focus and the authenticity that's drawing folks into farming in the first place. So I'm going to start with you, Rico. Can you talk to us about how Natura can scale in a city like New York, where a lot of the quote, farm-to-table chefs already have relationships with farmers, that they're already going to Union Square and they're doing that direct sourcing? How does a distribution company with your values get into that restaurant marketplace? And what does scale look like in that context?
It's always a question that we've had to ask ourselves as well coming into the market. I think for one, the farmers market model, probably what I'm going to say might sound a little bit very controversial. I think it's very inefficient for farmers, and I think part of the problem in the U.S. is that as a small farm wanting to farm in the, let's say, the right way for the environment and for the soil, really the outlet is the farmers market. Right? That's the starting point, and then that dictates the way the farm behaves, because you need a certain type of product that's available at the farmers market and so forth. So I think when we looked at New York, we thought, well, the farmers market is great that it's there for chefs, but I don't even know the numbers of the tens of thousands of farms that there are in the U.S. and how many of those are farming in the right way. But there's got to be, our view is that there's got to be much more than Union Square for the chefs. And our role, and it's the role that we play in any region that we're in, is to aggregate product from the farms that we believe are farming the best product. So if you look at our European supply chain, we buy yellow peaches from one farm in the north of Italy. We buy our white peaches from a farm in the south of Italy, and then near Naples. We buy our white and yellow nectarines from a farm in France. We buy our flat peaches from a farm in Spain. So we go variety specific. We find who we think is farming the best yellow peach, and we go and get that peach. So the way that we counter and the way that we can scale and add value to our customers in a country like the US is by being the ones that can source, aggregate, build scale by replicating or multiplying those relationships. So we work with farmers that are farming in less than an acre, and we work with farms that are farming in hundreds of acres. The beauty of what we do is we aggregate that, and then we create a market for it, or work with existing markets to kind of further push forward that market. Also by working for us, the relationships with the current big distribution networks are super important to scale and to achieving change, because 80-90% of consumption happens through the supermarket. So you've got to work with them to have that impact. So really, it's about, I guess, tackling scale by having an open mind and being able to look at our supply chain and investing in that supply chain so that we work with as many farms as possible and aggregate that product into one offer that then we can distribute through multiple channels, restaurants or stores, Whole Foods, and the like.
Very nice. So you all are starting with sausages.
Yep.
Can you talk about how that particular product enables you to think about accessibility and scale on sort of that vector, and also the whole animal utilization you were telling me about your relationship with? Yeah.
So the thing about ground meat across the board is that, Jocelyn and I think of it as like the great equalizer, if you will. So it's what takes, a ribeye or a fillet or a chuck roast or whatever, right? You throw it in a machine, it's all going to come out the same. It is also, in a lot of ways, the best view of what the entire animal can taste like. So I love that, like being able to select locally and then being able to present it like in one little like tasting, like here's what the animal tastes like. Like I love that idea of it. When you scale it up to the point where, you're working through a USDA facility and you have a nutrition label on the back of it, suddenly you can't do that because the fat content and, the nutrition label has to actually, like, scientifically be able to prove what's in there. So, along with that comes, like, whether it's like a, 70-30 trim or whether it's that you're using only shoulder and leg cuts or whatever, like, there's a formula for it, you have to follow that formula. So, we've thought about it in the sense that we work with farmers who already sell their middle meats to places like Italy, right? So like Italy's getting the chops and the bellies, so Jocelyn and I get to have dibs on the shoulder and the leg, and suddenly we're creating a whole animal circuit. We love that about that kind of relationship, and we work really hard towards finding those relationships. We do the CPG thing because it's about accessibility, right? Like Joss and I, me being up here talking to you guys, or us being behind a meat counter all day long, cutting away, making pretty princess stuff, or like people come by, is awesome, right? Like, I love it. Like, it's what I love to do so much. But how many people do I get to touch every day? How many people do I get to impact over the meat counter? Because I can run my mouth all day long and be real passionate, right? But that's not going to create a new farmer, right? That's not going to, help the bigger system. It's only maybe a neighborhood or something like that. So, we wanted to be in the mainstream grocery store to impact accessibility in a very different way. And I think, there are many roadblocks, right? But little by little, and it's what it is. Ultimately, sausages were an easy entry point into the market because it is the cheaper thing to do, cheaper thing to produce. But also, in order to really make that impact, we really want to be doing the deli meats. So that's ham, roast beef, pastrami, bacon, and when you start thinking about it that way, suddenly you're like, okay, do I slice it? Or is it whole and is it sold out of the deli counter? There are different ways to think about that, but ultimately, if you want to have a sliced packaged item on the shelf it takes an insane amount of coordination and money and like knowing that people are going to purchase it. Like these are all the things that we all worry about, right? So if they don't purchase it, then here we are sitting on like, 5,000 pounds of XYZ that's not going to sell, or we've sold it to somebody and now Whole Foods is sitting there dealing with it and they're like, hey, can you guys buy this back because it's about to spoil? So, across the board, there are all these issues. I think that, in the thought of scalability, what we're really looking at is in order to get people to buy it, it does have to be cheaper, and people don't quite understand the real cost associated with food, right? Like I think like all of us working really hard, like don't get paid enough to do it, and that's where the real issue is, I think. So ultimately, for us to be able to drive the costs down, to be able to compete with larger companies who are already like doing this in their sleep, basically, right? It means that we have to band together. So Joss and I have, friends who are butchers who've been doing this for longer than us, or just as long as us. We're all after the same thing. We're all starting to come out with like consumer packaged goods products. And in a way, people might say like, oh, like what's up with those people? Are they your competition? Or, and the answer is no, because we're all taking this rhinoceros run at the big tree. Like we're gonna tip it over. You know what I mean? And that's what it has to be. So we've talked about getting together with these folks and like throwing down on a much larger amount of meat together so that we can drive that cost down. And the minute we do, like it's a win-win across the board, hopefully. And eventually, we'll get to make that big change happen.
Can I just say something to her? 'Cause I think the point on accessibility is super, super important for impact. And I think that's where, that's where some of the compromise needs to come in. And that to me is this kind of, question around the idealism and being financially sustainable. Is that if we want to have a crack at changing the food system, there needs to be impact, and impact needs to happen at a mass market level. And for that to happen, we need to make products accessible. Otherwise, it's just at the fringes. It's fine to go at the farmer's market, but the impact of the farmer's market is a very small niche of consumers.
I know we're getting into our Q&A time, but I know that this is in particular also really important to both of you, so I don't know if you, well, I just want each of you, because I know you've thought so much about accessibility and feeding your community sort of in balance with the chef supply and scale in that way, so sorry to do this to you, but somewhat quickly, can you sort of talk about how you thought about building out that portfolio of servicing all of those audiences?
Yes. I think the simplest way to put it is those two audiences, my community and even just the general public in comparison to the chefs, they usually call for slightly different products. Mm-hmm. Not different quality of product, but different variations, People at the farmer's market or the general public wants a Yukon gold potato. Restaurants want the upstate abundance potato, And so there's, I think, on the point of accessibility and creating some sort of balance in your operation, we've developed our operation around providing staples for the general public, all the things that we all eat on a regular basis, everyone eats on a very regular basis, as well as the many specialty crops that we grow for the fine dining restaurants and for the farmer's market or whatever it may be. Just good variation and understanding.
Thank you. And for Kelly, I just want you to touch briefly on, I feel like getting into Whole Foods is sort of like the dream for so many farmers, that would be what success looks like. I feel like if we asked farmers, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? Like, I want to be in Whole Foods. So how, the scale issue, how would a farmer start to think about setting up a business that would be, well positioned to enter into that relationship, if that were the right relationship to enter into?
So I'd say, number one, don't be afraid to say what you want to be in 5 years or 10 years or what your end goal is. You want to sell to, I don't know, know where you're going. Find your mentors and your partners out there that you can reach out to and ask for their support and their guidance. Whole Foods has an entire team of people we call local foragers, which I always thought was a really funny title because we're foraging for partners, not mushrooms, which public thinks we're foraging for mushrooms. But we have a whole team of people. We have 24 people, one in each region at least. There's some regions that have multiple that are dedicated to partnering. And, I would probably say on any given day, 60% of the people that we talk to are not people we currently partner with. They're people we're looking at partnering with for the future. And make those connections. You never know when something's going to come back around. Outside of that, I'd also, within those connections, know what you need to, know what you realistically need to do to get to that point. So for example, working with a larger retailer, you may be required to have a GAP. You may be required to have traceability. What are the systems that you're going to need to start thinking about putting into place to be successful, so that when you come to me and you've got your product and your volumes there, but then I say, but what about your general liability insurance, or your GAP, or are you compliant with FSMA regulations? Because the minute you start going into a retailer, you're a little bit more looked at. You're a little bit more under the microscope there. The points of distribution increase risk. So know what you need to be to get there. I'll be doing the field day tomorrow. I can put you in touch with all of those people in the regions, or I'm happy to talk through it too. So.
All right, so we're going to open it up for questions. Laura has a mic. Anyone wants to jump in?
My question is for Franco, and staying with the idyllic mindset, and hopefully we see a world where people are supporting their communities more, and food's starting to get sourced from more around you. How do you see distribution companies of your size answering the question of ecological distribution from, say you congregate the United States and you have the best farm in Maine that grows, I don't know, cherries or something, and you want to get them to Arizona, how are you going to justify shipping them around?
It's a very good question. I think it's a matter of, we always look at it through the lens of impact, and how can we have the greatest impact? And I think that, sustainability generally is a difficult word to define. Like, is it better to ship something, 100 miles by truck, or is it better to grow something under a heated greenhouse? Like, there's not like a deciding line that says, this is good and this is bad, generally, right? There's all whether it's transportation, whether it's local consumption, and so forth. So for us, it's about impact. And if we can take a product that is amazing and get consumers to, because we believe in change through flavor. We've always sourced on flavor, and we've always believed that the way that the system is going to change is not through supply, but it's through demand. So if we can get consumers educated and wanting to pay more money for nutrient-dense food that tastes amazing, then that's what's going to revert through the supply chain, through people like us, and direct through farmers, for farmers to be farming, and for us as a race to be farming in the right way. So if we can deliver a greater impact by aggregating that product and delivering from Maine into Arizona, then we believe that it's a good thing to do. And that's for me where that compromise is that we could sit on the fringes, and we might feel better about ourselves, because there's a lot of stuff that we do. I was at a regenerative agriculture conference a couple of weeks ago in the UK, and I said something that for a lot of people was quite a shock, but I said, we make a massive compromise. Like, we sell industrially farmed produce that we're not proud of, but we do it because we believe, and I'm not going to get into this now, if you grab me I can explain it into more detail, but we believe that allows us to have more impact, and it's financially sustainable for us. And people were kind of shocked. We could sit and be much more, proud in one hand of what sits in our warehouse, but we wouldn't have the impact that we have today, and we wouldn't sell as much of the good quality product. So I hope it kind of answers it, but it's a bit about compromise and impact. Yeah.
Thank you. So if you're a beginning farmer, first season, how do you break into kind of mindset or market?
There are quite a bit of challenges that you will face before you even sell the product, you know? And you're going to need to sell the product to make it your time worth it. But I would say, kind of going back to what Franco was saying, the farmer's market is a good place to start or to break in and to kind of get an understanding of the consumer, price points, packing your produce, getting it from point A to point B, storing your produce. There's a lot of things that need to be in line before the produce ever leaves the farm. Now, if you have those things figured out, then distribution and where it's going is the next step. But, you know, storing, packing, how you're harvesting your produce, and how you're going to get it from point A to point B is definitely some of the critical checkpoints before you ever reach point B. But point B can give you the next step.
So I have a little bit more of a weirdly fluffy answer, but build your community. The farms that I've watched over the years grow from farmers market to CSA to restaurants to wholesale, they have a community around them. A retail outlet's fine, it's great. However, a lot of what people are buying when they're buying a local product or a specialty crop is sort of a little bit of your story.
If it's good. And that's like a crazy question, right? Because like, if you're growing it, you're probably going to love it because of how much you put into it, right? But it's really difficult to understand the bigger picture of like what people are actually looking for. And honestly, I've been like tasting meat like carefully for like 12 plus years, you know. It's like every time I taste it, I'm like, what do I think about this? And that's a crazy thing too, you know, not everybody's doing that. So, you know, understanding your community, meaning your audience and the people who are gonna ultimately consume the product that you're creating is the most important thing. And, you know, I mean, we struggle with that too. I think we all struggle with that because that's really just how you're going to ultimately grow your business. So, you know, it's why I value the time I spend up here talking to people. It's why I value the time I spent like behind the meat counter talking to people, or, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? Every time I go to the farmer's market, I'm just like, it's hugs all around because I want to know you, you know, and I want you to know me. Like, that's the most important thing, I think.
I think there's another.
Next question, I guess.
Hi. So I heard, or I saw a sort of universal agreement across the board when it was suggested that the solution is to get more people in the market is to bring the price point down. I mean, to band together.
I think that's definitely an approach, and it's a necessary one. And I also think, you know, conversely, we can try to find ways to put more money in people's pockets. And so I'm hearing some conversation about we're changing the system, right? We want to change the food system. And I'm wondering if any of you find that in your businesses you have room to sort of push on those levers to move other systems so that people can have more money to spend on food, right? Whether it's health insurance or whether it's housing or whether it's transportation. Like, do any of you have the space to look at the broader picture and say, like, hey, I'm in business as a farmer or making meats, and I think that my business would benefit, you know, you say this to maybe a legislator or maybe a fellow business owner. Like, I think that if people had health insurance, they would be able to spend more money on my product. Like, do any of you have space to do that, or do you feel like you're so wrapped up in the food system part of it that there's just no time and energy and like you need somebody else to advocate?
I think that that's really tricky. Can I tell you why?
Yeah.
Because that's all I think about is like what I can do for my family, what the people who work for me can do for their families, right? And I'm someone who will like sit on the sidewalk with someone who's like, oh, I quit, to be like, okay, let's talk about it for 3 hours while Jocelyn's inside sweating, you know? Because like, if you're ultimately not happy in the place that you work, then you're not going to give it your like 1,000%, and everyone's got to come with their A game, right, for it to go somewhere. But all those things cost money, and that's the messed up part about it, right? So like, I mean, this is a greater political conversation, I think, honestly, right? Because how much power and control do we have over those little things? I think that the bigger you grow, the more idealism you can bring into the fold. And I think, you know, companies like Whole Foods does that. And I think that that's awesome. You know, for me, like as a, you know, like 2-man show brick and mortar, it's hard to do, right? Because you're going to hemorrhage doing it. So it's a matter of compromise also in terms of what you can and can't do, and, you know, how much idealism is really going to make sense at that moment. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but I feel like that's kind of a neat, pretty answer.
For Kelly specifically, we have the first Whole Foods in our community is in construction and development construction, so obviously that's a point of conversation for producers in the region and stuff. So kind of a brief two-part. One, what's like is there a general threshold? You haven't had really the opportunity to get into that yet, as far as that, you know, I imagine most of us are going to be small scale farmers, you know, maybe some medium size and stuff, but, you know, let's say like vegetable production, 5 acres or less, for anyone out there. Like, is that a threshold that works for your buyers? Are you doing a lot of like single store supply or any, and, you know, for farmers that are hyper local, hyper seasonal, you know, there's lots of variation, you know, 40 varieties of crops on small acreage. What does that actually look like, supply chain to the store, and farmers kind of looking to enter that market? And then kind of piggybacking off of that, obviously it's no mystery, no matter how big your business is, you brand it as local as possible. I mean, you know, we are the sexiest billboard you can have, you know, like small local farms, whatever. So there's some smaller co-ops and like food distribution channels in our community that kind of have leveraged mutually beneficial things. So, you know, there's a co-op that they might buy X, Y, and Z from a farm, but there's a lot more that we grow, and they actually do like a pop-up farmer's market or a CSA distribution point, kind of counterintuitive marketing. Like, you can come to a grocery store to pick up vegetables directly from a farmer. Obviously, that's not the only thing that, you know, they're hoping you buy. And are there any types of partnerships like that that Whole Foods has experimented or engaged with? Kind of both of those, I guess.
So your first question, short answer, all scales. What I can tell you from my experience, and I have worked with, not in this role, but in my previous role, working within the region, I've worked with farms that were 2 acres in the middle of City Park in New Orleans. I've worked with farms that were much, much larger, right? But still within the smaller side of medium. There is opportunity to work on a smaller scale with Whole Foods, of course, especially when we're talking about a community that's getting its first store. That's an incredible opportunity. The question that you have to ask yourself is like, what can you afford to do cost-wise? My experience there working with the smallest farm out there, there were certain things that they could afford to sell us because it grew easy, it was abundant, and it worked really well. It's not a year-round sales partnership, though. It's only during that one season. What I love about our program, though, is that that's flexible. We don't want you to commit to selling to 30 stores if you have 5 acres. That's never going to work for you. It's never going to work for us. But we still want to work with you if it works out, if it's a win-win partnership. So at the end of the day, it's really about like we both have to see success there so that we can both continue doing what we're doing. On the flip side, the marketing question, it's almost a marketing question, counterintuitive marketing. I really like the way you put that. We've done that. I think I mentioned earlier, Whole Foods has 11 regions, which means we have 7,000 different ways of doing things. But I've definitely seen stores that host farmers markets, stores that host CSA pickups. It's one thing we love is creative partnerships, right? We love to come up with a partnership. You're sitting right there with Carol. Carol's in marketing, and she works with community engagement. Like, she's the type of person who does all that work. I think Carol has a really exciting job because she gets to work with community and plan things like that. So we do have people that do that. There's a really cool example if you look up Refresh. Of course, like I was literally standing in front of this building the other day. Our Broad Street store in New Orleans is built into a community center. And there's a community farm on the property. And way back when we first opened it, we worked with the Refresh project, to do a farmer's market. And I was so excited when I got to New Orleans the other day and I was looking through my Facebook events to see what was going on. There it is, the Tuesday market in the lobby of the Refresh project, which is the entrance to Whole Foods there. So yeah, we do it. Come talk to me. We'll figure out who to put you in touch with. Okay?
Maybe one more. Have one more? And we'll have another one.
Hello, everybody. My question is for David or anybody else that has insight on it. What's the best way to communicate with chefs to let them know week by week what you have available? Text, email, mix of both, different chefs?
I'd say depends on how much time you have. It really does. I was talking to Jason, one of the folks that work here at Stone Barns, about it last night, and he was asking me how we send out our product list. And our general list goes out via email. And some chefs that we work very closely with get an additional list of things that we have limited supply of or things that we're experimenting with, trial varieties, things that we need information back on. Depends on what your operation looks like. If you have a very systematic operation, which we do not, we do a lot of experiments. We do a lot of trials and various projects, and so sometimes I leave samples of things with deliveries, you know, that I want folks to try that's going to come into season. But email is definitely our go-to way of distributing our product list. And text messaging is definitely more effective for some people, as email kind of goes out of style. I'm not sure if everyone even checks their email nowadays. Some people see it and don't even open it, and then ask me what I have available. Right?
David, do you give them a heads up about what's coming down the line?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah, which is, it's difficult to gauge sometimes what timelines look like before they're there with certain crops, but yeah, giving a window of time, allowing folks to start planning for what's coming into season is also very, very critical.
I'd say just one bit of advice, make sure that it's consistent and that it goes out at the same time every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because chefs will fit that into a routine, and you don't want to be sending stuff on different days at different times. So choose one and stick with it. And
And think about what makes it easy for them to buy from you. You know, what's gonna just make it the easiest, and yeah, the same time every day, same format. You know, some continuity too.
Small follow-up question, are you selling to them, like, are you delivering once a week or twice a week?
We run deliveries twice a week to various restaurants. Some restaurants we do twice a week. One thing we don't do is rush orders. We used to in the past, and it'll kill you. It killed us, at least, you know, just trying to accommodate for someone that, or just for ill planning in some situations. In other situations, it was just something that we didn't have the wheels for, or, you know, enough people and enough places where I could send someone to rush over here. But that was one point that I wanted to touch on. You're going to have a lot of times where people are going to be like, hey, we need this right now or tomorrow, and sometimes it's not realistic, and you're going to want to try your best to make it happen, but sometimes.
Yeah, careful with bespoke orders. Very careful with
It's dangerous. But yes, we run a couple of deliveries a week, and we used to run one delivery a week, and then we would run post-market deliveries at the end of the week on Saturdays because of how far out of the city we were. We still do the post-market, but when we have stuff left over, we have a short list of chefs that we stop through their restaurants and hope to get rid of whatever we have left over. But yes, twice a week. Various times, the times change as the seasons change, and sometimes, like our deliveries, it doesn't change throughout the season, but they have shifted. As I told you before, when we first started doing this, we were delivering at night. Again, we were very far out of the city. We didn't even live on the farm property that we were working. We lived back in the city, so we would go back home and run deliveries on our way home. Craziness. Our operation is a lot more efficient at this point.
I'm so sorry to cut this off, but we have arrived at time, and I think there's might have to, we're doing evaluations now or no? And I just want to say before we go, definitely come up and find these folks, get them to give you the info that you need to take this information out into the world, get David to send you a sample product list. I don't know, I'm volunteering you for that, or, you know, get Erica to commit to trying your meat sometime. And I also just have to say to the live stream audience, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned at 11 right here. There's going to be Building a Grassroots Farm with Jermaine Jenkins live streamed. Do not miss it. She is amazing. But I just want to give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much, guys.